Okay, we'll just give it one more minute to see if anyone else joins. Okay, let's get started. So, good evening, everyone. Thank you for joining us tonight for our zoning deep dive on housing. This is part of a series that's focused on specific topics from the draft zoning framework, which we shared during the town hall last Thursday on June 13th. If you weren't able to join the town hall, the recording is available on the New York City Department of City Planning YouTube, and we'll also make sure to share that link out after this meeting. The goal of the zoning deep dive on housing is to provide a more detailed overview on a housing tool we'd like to use as a part of the Jamaica Neighborhood Plan called Mandatory Inclusionary Housing, or MIH for short. We received a few questions around this tool during the town hall, and we'd like to share more information tonight. Before we get started, I do want to introduce a couple of my colleagues who are here tonight. So as many of you know, my name is Jasmine Tapale. I'm project managing the Jamaica Neighborhood Plan, and I'm also part of the New York City Department of City Planning. So turning it to my colleague Tristy, who also works with me at the Department of City Planning, if you can introduce yourself.
Hi, everyone. My name is Trustee Balacharishakia. I'm a borough planner at the Queen's office, also working on this Jamaica neighborhood plan. It was nice meeting everybody. I can pass it on to you, Jude.
Hi everyone, my name is Yuju Park, pronoun she, her. I'm the Senior Fair Housing Planner at Housing Preservation and Development, and I'm joined by my colleague, Annabelle, so I'll pass it to you.
Hi, everyone. My name is Annabelle Meunier. I'm a planner for the Queens and Staten Island Borough Office. And that's it. Oh, and at HPD, I'm sorry.
Great, thank you all. If we can go to the next slide. So just to share an overview of some of the items we'll cover tonight, we're going to briefly review the neighborhood planning process just to show where we are and where we're going. Then we'll share a list of upcoming meetings. We'll give a brief refresher of the zoning framework, and then we'll talk about the city's housing toolbox and MIH. So if you can just switch it to the next slide, please. And so let me pass it to my colleague Tristy so she can talk through the neighborhood planning process.
Thank you, Jasmine. So we walked through this process during the town hall, but wanted to emphasize that we're still in the middle of a process. We released our draft strategies, which are a concrete set of ideas for changes to zoning, investments in programs and services, as well as policy changes to support the current and future neighborhood. And we just finished sharing the draft zoning framework, which is part of the draft strategies last Thursday. The next step in the process is for our zoning framework to enter environmental review. The New York City's environmental review process involves a comprehensive analysis of potential environmental impacts of a proposal, such as air quality, noise, transportation, schools, and open space. We'll talk about it more later in the presentation. While the zoning goes through environmental review, we will continue working with our partner agencies and all of you to continue to define potential investments that are needed to support the neighborhood as it grows. Finally, we will come back together next year to kick off the uniform land use review process, where stakeholders, including community boards, board of presidents, the City Planning Commission, and the City Council will all have a chance to weigh in on the plan. And if approved, The plan will result in new zoning as well as new programs, services, and capital projects. The city is required to update you on the status of these commitments on an annual basis. Like we mentioned earlier, tonight's deep dive is part of a series. Next Tuesday, we'll take a closer look at the industrial areas of zoning of Jamaica along Liberty Avenue. And then next Thursday, we'll focus more on the corridors of the neighborhood. This will lead up to our scoping meeting on July 11th, which is an opportunity for the community to let us know what areas we should be studying for potential impacts. I will also talk more about these later in the presentation. And just a reminder that all of the work we're doing in this neighborhood plan is guided by these goals. Each goal has a number of strategies that you can find on our website, but we specifically highlighted the strategies that the zoning framework is addressing. For example, as you see under goal 1, to improve quality of life, the zoning framework is aiming to create a supportive environment for diverse businesses to grow or open up to meet the needs of the community. And here is the draft zoning framework we presented at last week's town hall. Just a quick refresher, the red and yellow areas represent zoning districts where housing is allowed. Usually yellow indicates residential zoning where housing is typically built. However, the red areas, which are commercial districts, also allow for housing. And I would like to pass it on to Jasmine to talk more about housing.
Thank you, Shristi. So, during the town hall, we walk through different zoning districts we're thinking about for the Jamaican Neighborhood Plan. But tonight's focus is really around housing. So we want to share more information on the affordable housing tool we can introduce in Jamaica called mandatory inclusionary housing. Like I mentioned earlier, we got a lot of questions on it during the town hall, so we want to spend some time tonight to share more information on MIH. Next slide. Uh, but before we, dive into some of those tools that we have in our toolbox, we want to talk about how the city overall supports housing and just want to put this conversation in context. Next slide. And so, as many of you know, and probably experience yourselves, the entire New York City has overlapping housing crises. We want to walk through how these crises relate to Jamaica and the neighborhood plan because much of the struggles many are facing in Jamaica are just happening across the city. Next slide. So first, what we all see every day in New York City is just housing costs are too high. Rents are rising, but incomes aren't. It's even hard for New Yorkers with stable jobs and incomes to find apartments. Over half of New Yorkers spend too much or more than a third of their income on rent and their rent burden, which means that middle shade of orange that you see on the screen. And then around 30% of New Yorkers are severely rent burdened, meaning they spend more than half of their income on rent, which is that dark orange that you see on the screen. Next slide. This is something I hear really frequently when I talk to the community in Jamaica, that what people make aren't matching up to the average private rental. So this example on the screen shows a family of three where they make about 50,000 a year. So it's around maybe 3,000 after taxes. But then on average, a two-bedroom apartment in New York City is around 2,451. Next slide. So the crisis of high housing costs is just compounded by the fact that we haven't built a lot of housing in New York City. The citywide vacancy rate is around 1.4%, which according to the state constitutes a housing emergency. On this slide, we see how vacancy rates differ quite a bit depending on asking rents of units. So on the lower end, apartments under 1% of the apartments below 1,500 on the market, the price needed for like a typical New York City family of three that makes about maybe 50,000 a year on average, income trying to find an affordable home, it's really tough. On the flip side, around 13% of units are vacant if you can afford a $2,300 a month apartment. So meaning more housing options for renters with higher incomes. Jamaica is part of this larger ecosystem, so things happening across the city affect it. But let's talk a little bit more about Jamaica now. Next slide. Thank you. So in Jamaica, there's an almost even mix of renters and homeowners, even though across the city, there are more renters than homeowners. Next slide. So some of the challenges that renters face, in Jamaica, 70% of the buildings are under 6 units, so meaning they probably lack rent stabilization and related tenant protections. In general, there's a lack of protections in part of the reason that we see high rates of executed residential evictions in Jamaica. So in Jamaica, we have double the rates of residential evictions than the rest of Queens. They also rank in the top 10 neighborhoods for the highest residential evictions citywide. Next slide. But when it comes to homeowners, which are half of Jamaica residents, they're also at risk for displacement here in Jamaica. Many homeowners in Jamaica are considered house rich, but cash poor, meaning they have more equity locked into the value of their home than they have liquid assets. So as a result, Jamaica is home to a large number of homeowners facing foreclosures in recent years. So here, Jamaica exceeds the rate of mortgage burden of Queens and the city, meaning they spend greater than 30% of housing costs on their mortgage. Also, we see an increasing number of homeowners vulnerable to deed theft, which is on the rise. So HPD has been working in the neighborhood through this, which, we can talk more about in a little bit. Next slide. And lastly, just on affordable housing production in Jamaica, um, in the district since 2014, there's been about 3,400 affordable housing units that's been financed. So of those, 2 out of 3 serve about low income households. Next slide. So in the context of what we've heard so far, we want to talk about how the city can address some of these crises. So again, looking at the city's toolbox and talking more about MIH, the one tool we do want to introduce here in Jamaica. Next slide. So overall, HPD is looking at a more comprehensive look at how to make or keep housing affordable. We're looking at it through the lens of like rent stabilization, so protecting tenants or people who rent homes from that sudden rent increase that may cause financial hardship or displacement. We're thinking about income restriction. So income-based eligibility that aims to ensure that subsidies go to households that need them, and also rent burden protection. So if a household's income decreases, rent will remain at 30% of their income. Next slide. And so just want to share kind of that the city has a few tools and strategies to achieve housing stability and affordability. So they include protecting tenants and supporting homeowners, preserving existing affordable housing, creating new affordable homes, and providing flexibility through zoning. We've been hearing the need for all of these things in Jamaica, and these are all core components of our neighborhood plan that we'll be doing here in Jamaica. But for tonight, we're really going to focus on the creation of affordable homes. So really, in that last one of administering zoning and tax incentives, that's going to be our main focus for tonight. But also want to stress and emphasize that that alone can't, help the housing crisis that the entire city faces and that Jamaica is experiencing as well. We have to look at a range of things, thinking about all these other types of protections and strategies in order to help kind of make a dent in this neighborhood. Next slide. And so just a little bit on HPD and how they work. HPD finances 100% affordable housing on both public and private property. So essentially all the units are affordable. They do this through a number of ways, like through loans, tax incentives, and other public resources to develop housing. Um, if there's a public site, so a site owned by the city, HPD can issue a request for proposals for developers to construct and develop a project on that site. But when it comes to private sites, owners need to approach HPD to finance, to essentially partner as to create that affordable housing. HPD's strongest influence is over 100% affordable housing to determine program and income levels. So housing targeted to a range of different income levels. Next slide. So how does this income targeting happen? So affordable housing generally means that households spend less than 30% of their income on rent. This percent is connected to HUD income levels, which is set every year by the Federal Housing and Urban Development Agency to guide their distribution of housing funds across the city. Income levels and limits are set by HUD, so not by the city, and you'll also hear them referred to as AMI. So AMI stands for Area Median Income. This chart lets you figure out, like, am I eligible based on these income limits? So based on your household size and income, the vast majority of HPD financed housing serves households in the pink color bar, so households earning up to 80% AMI, which translates to about 96K for a family of three. But for anyone making below 30%, those units are reserved for those coming from shelters. But just the sum of this, maybe just to say it a different way, is that HUD is the one that's controlling these AMI levels that you'll often hear. It's not something that the city controls, but something that is set by the federal government. Next slide. And so, talking about MIH itself, so the Mandatory Inclusionary Housing Program, it's one of the many tools we have to facilitate new affordable housing. MIH units are funded by a developer looking to construct market rate units in rezoned areas. So in exchange for these higher density, the city mandates that 20 to 30% of the units be permanently affordable for low and moderate income New Yorkers. However, despite being constructed by the developer, affordable housing units are regulated and marketed by HPD and distributed by the housing lottery to ensure the income eligibility requirements are adhered to. The rent and income levels vary depending on which MIH option is selected. So there's two primary options and a third option that could be mapped alongside the others. So typically, we see either option one, which requires 25% of the unit set aside for households earning 60% AMI or like 76K for a family of three. We have option two, which requires 30% of units set aside for households earning 80% AMI or about 102K for a family of three. And then option three is a deeper affordability option, which has 20% at 40% AMI, which is about 51K for a family of three. Just want to note that there are 2024 limits. So what you're seeing right now is actually from 2023. And just in general, that most of the new affordable housing in Jamaica will be built on private sites through MIH. Next slide. So throughout the Jamaican neighborhood plan, oh, sorry, can you move up one slide? So yeah, through the Jamaican Neighborhood Plan, we're thinking about making MIH available through all the areas in pink. So all the areas along Hillside Avenue, going south of that to Jamaica Avenue by the LIR station, along Guy Arbor and Merrick Boulevard. Next slide. So like we mentioned a few slides ago, MIH comes with a few options. There's a lot of information on this slide, but we wanted to share some basic examples of developments in New York City that had proposed these permanently affordable units for different MIH options and what the breakdown of these units could look like within a development. The developers can provide a range of low to moderate income tiers. So if the rents of the affordable units achieve the required average of the AMI. These rents and income on the screen are based on a 3-person household and 2-bedroom example rent and HUD income limits shown here. They're from different years, but just to give you all a sense of kind of how developers end up breaking up the types of housing they provide through MIH. Next slide. So just talking about who could potentially qualify for MIH if it becomes a tool here in Jamaica. Based on some of the examples, and looking at like ACS 2018 to 2022 data, approximately 49% of Jamaica households earning between 25,000 all the way to 100K per year could be eligible for MIH affordable housing units. Next slide. And then lastly, we had talked a little bit about this during the town hall, but just so everyone's aware, today in Jamaica, what we have is called voluntary inclusionary housing, which is also called VIH. As its name implies, it's a voluntary program. It's an affordable housing tool that came out maybe in in the 1980s. So it's a very old program. And it's in certain areas across the city, and Jamaica happens to be one of those areas. If you look at the map to your right, you see in the orange some of the other areas that have VIH, with Jamaica outlined as one of them. With VIH, they had kind of a different structure. So for example, they were looking mainly at 80% AMIs. So they didn't have kind of these other options that MIH currently has. But in Jamaica, since this program was enacted in Jamaica in like 2007 to about present day, we've had about 1,300 units built through that VIH program. So this inclusionary housing program, and about 2,000 units that are still in the pipeline that may get built in the future. But essentially what we're saying is that through the Jamaican Neighborhood Plan, instead of having a voluntary program for affordable housing, if we get to use the tool of MIH, we get to essentially mandate affordable housing in every new development instead of it being a voluntary program. Next slide. And so I want to pass it back to my colleague Tristy so she can talk a little bit about the environmental review process that we're all about to in progress.
Thank you, Jasmine. So if you have attended our town hall, this next part is a refresher. But for anyone who is hearing about this for the first time, we released our draft scope of work last week, which is a draft document that describes our draft zoning framework, where so that map showed earlier with the zoning districts and outlines the different topics that will be studied under environment review, like schools, air quality, infrastructure, etc. So the scoping meeting, which is scheduled for July 11th, is an opportunity for the public to comment on this draft. Everyone on this meeting, your neighbors, anyone who lives and works in the neighborhood can provide their recommendations and what should be included in this 6 to 8 month long analysis. The types of comments that we are looking for during the scoping meeting is around these 19 topics. They include topics like transportation, air quality, schools, open space, public health, and many others. So if you think we could be looking at one of these topics in a specific area of Jamaica, scoping is the time to let us know so that we can study it further. There are a few ways to participate for the July 11th meeting. If you just want to listen to the comments people are sharing, we'll be live streaming the entire meeting on the New York City Planning YouTube page. If you would like to add a comment during the July 11th scoping meeting, that meeting will be virtual and you can join online. During the scoping meeting, everyone will have 3 minutes to share their comment. It will be recorded and the next person will be called on. That July 11th meeting is just a meeting to leave your comment so that it is recorded. There is no Q&A during that meeting. In case you're not able to make that July 11th meeting to leave your comment, you can email us your comments starting now up until July 22nd. Now, I sent out the information along with the recording, but we'll make sure that I send it out again when I sent around this recording. Just want to emphasize all comments are considered equally. So a comment we get during the July 11th meeting is weighed the same as a comment we get through email. And lastly, I would like to turn it to Jasmine again.
Thank you, Shristi. So we hope you found tonight's information helpful. Just a reminder that we have 2 other deep dives next Tuesday and Thursday. All of these deep dives will be recorded and we'll share the recordings with everyone and we'll make sure to also put them up on our website. So with that covered, we do want to transition into a Q&A. I'm sure many of you have questions. So the way that we want to run this next section is just that if you have a question, if you can raise your hand and we'll go in that order. We may have a lot of questions tonight, so hoping if everyone can keep it to about 3 minutes, just so that we can make sure that everyone's question is answered. And so, Shristi, if you can just pull down the share screen. And if anyone has any questions, please feel free to use the raise hand button. If you look down on the Zoom screen, you should have a button with a hand that says raise hand. And our first question is from Osman. Osman, you can feel free to unmute and ask your question. And also, please let me know if I'm mispronouncing your name.
No, you actually said it correct. Good evening, everybody.
Good
So
evening.
I just had a quick question about schooling and the plan and the planning for Jamaica. Would this include adding new schools to the zone? Because our schools right now are, as we know, are heavily congested with students, where we have some classes have 30 to 32 students. So I just wanted to know how would this affect our schooling? Thank you.
Yeah, for schools, something that Tristy had mentioned, right now we're about to start an environmental review process. So schools is actually one of the things that is going to be studied in the next 6 to 8 months. So they're going to do an analysis of the schools in the neighborhood to see if there's like a need for a new school. But also want to encourage you, if you want to leave a comment on the scoping document, to share kind of that comment that you just shared right now, saying like, hey, you should really look at schools and like maybe these specific blocks, because I know in this school they have like classrooms like you just mentioned that are over 32 students, and I'm concerned that any more growth is gonna exacerbate that. Great. So next, John, feel free to unmute. I see your camera turned on, but I don't think you unmuted. John, just so you know, I'm not sure if you're speaking, but you're still muted, so we can't hear you.
Hello?
Yes, we can hear you now.
I'm very sorry. It took a minute.
No, it's
Question.
okay. Yes.
Okay. The area now that's going to be for rezoning, is there any possibility that this will be extended any further down Jamaica Avenue? Or is this
When you
absolutely the end?
Well, right now, this is the area that we're focusing on. If there's a reason to either extend it further out, that is something that you could bring up during the scoping meeting. Essentially, after the scoping meeting, we're going to take all the comments and kind of take a re-examine these districts and the boundaries that we're proposing to see if we need to refine it.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome. And opening it up, does anyone else have any other questions? Anything they want to talk through related to either MIH or just housing in Jamaica? Um, Also open to questions if you just have general questions about the Jamaica Neighborhood Plan. If there's anything I can clarify from the town hall, I'm happy to have a conversation about it now too. Austin, go for it.
Hey, again, sorry. One other question.
Yeah,
Would
sure.
this be cause of displacement for our homeless citizens that are down in the Jamaica area living in the shelters? Like we know when it comes to rebuilding, some old buildings are gonna have to come down, and I know a few of them would be a shelter too. So how would this affect the homeless that are living down in the area? Thank you.
Yeah, I think the way that we're thinking about it is just that one of the ways to solve homelessness is to be able to create more housing and get them into housing. I think we're thinking about it a few different ways of just like, there's other ways that we need to tackle. There's so many different ways to tackle the homeless crisis, I think in general, but I know kind of some of the tools that the city is using right now is like some of the hotels in the neighborhood are being used as like homeless shelters, and there's kind of other ways that the unhoused population is getting housed in the neighborhood. I think that's not going to exactly be affected by the neighborhood plan, but our ultimate goal is to try to find ways to put them into homes. But also, I want to turn to my colleagues at HPD if any of you kind of have more that you want to share about just general like housing and the homeless population.
I would just add that any like city-owned shelters or operated by DHS, I don't think are likely to as likely to come down so easily. The city has that's another a whole discretionary process is city-owned property. So if the city were to publicly dispose of it, that which would be unlikely, they would have to auction it through DCAS or Department of Citywide Administrative Services. And if they were to, want to swap the land for another city purpose, that would also be like a discretionary action that would have to go through ULURP. So I think it's, at least for city-owned sites, not as likely that they will be coming down. I think the plan would be more to work around that, or maybe work to redevelop them. And I would think that in any situation, DHS would look at, seriously look at placing existing residents, because I don't think they can just kick them out. So that's what I would say to that.
Thank you, Annabelle. Next, Valerie. Valerie, you can unmute and ask your question.
Okay. Can you hear me now?
Yes, we can hear you.
Oh, okay. My question is, in Jamaica, now that they have so many bus lanes in Jamaica, and when they build more of these apartment buildings, it's so difficult to get down between 168th Street and Supton. How is this going to be dealt with, this traffic going between 168 and Supton, when the main route now is Archer and it can't even handle most of the traffic that's on there now?
Yeah, that's actually really helpful that you described it that way, because so we're still in the middle of this process, but one of the things that we are doing, like, I know we talked a lot about zoning strategies between like tonight and during the town hall, but that's just one part of the neighborhood plan. We're doing a whole range of other things through the neighborhood plan, and things like thinking about like, well, how do we for example, one of our goals is to improve quality of life for residents. So, thinking about like exactly what you just mentioned, like what are there some challenges around transportation? So these are the things we need to hear and learn more about. So that's extremely helpful, because we're essentially working with all the city agencies to think about, how do we create more strategies um, to make it just, again, like either improving quality of life, creating like a better Jamaica overall.
Jasmine,
Yes.
question. The industrial areas, you didn't mention that. You said all the areas in pink. So those industrial areas, are they being considered also for additional housing?
So the industrial areas are also double in that they are IBZ areas, so industrial business zones. That's a policy that got enacted a while ago, but essentially with that policy is that no housing can get created in those zones. So we're not proposing any housing for those areas.
But I also wanted to kind of add that there are areas that are within the M district that lies outside of IBC, where we are kind of.
Yeah, I'm on Zoom. I'm on a Zoom right now.
Sorry. So as I was mentioning, so the M1 districts that are outside of IBC, we are looking at sort of a mixed use developments that could potentially develop in those M district areas. And also, as Jasmine was mentioning, we're looking at like improving the quality of life in these areas. We're looking at how in addition to the affordable housing, bringing affordable housing, how we can, improve the streetscapes of these M districts that are in need of improvement.
Monica, I see you have your hand up too.
Yes, I have a question. At any time, will all of the agencies that are involved, such as the Department of Education, Transportation, Sanitation, will they come on with us and talk to us about what's going to happen? Or is that coming back in your study each one is sending us a study to look at?
So It's part of both. The analysis that's going to happen through the environmental review is definitely one way where that happens. And then we can work with the council member to figure out a different way for agencies to come together and talk more about kind of what we learned from that analysis.
The reason why I asked that is let's take the DOA, let's say schools that have the bunkers still in their yards. Now they're at 100, they're past 120% as far as students are concerned. Are they planning on taking those down? Are they planning on redoing the building? Are they planning on building in that area? Those are the things that we're looking for. We're not looking for the bunkers thing because they've been there for about 30 years. So are they going to build something new? That's what I'm interested in. So we'd like to talk to those agencies and find out what they're going to do.
Gotcha. I mean, Monica, too, what would be very helpful, I know I probably sound like a broken record now, but what would be really helpful is also exactly what you just said, to submit that as a comment to the scoping documents, because it's really those things that we need to hear, so that when they're doing those school analysis, they're looking at these specific things. They're not just kind of looking at data blindly, if that makes sense.
Reason being because we need to know capacity as far as, let's say, if you're going to look at, let's say, Guybrush Boulevard, if you're going to look at Sutton Boulevard and you're looking at building up higher, then you're talking about more people being there. So now they got to tell us the percentage of students that can come into, additional students should be able to come into a school. I'm just using the school as an example.
Yeah. No, that one's a great example, and I do hope that you put in a good comment about schools and exactly what you just mentioned. I think that would go a long way to helping analyze a lot of that. And Natalie.
Hello. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, we can hear you clear.
My question is there planning for more of these high-rise buildings west of Sutphin Boulevard? Because one block from Sutphin Boulevard on Waltham Street between 97th and 95th is this tremendous high-rise building right across the street from single-family homes. And I can't understand how that's possible. I mean, what's going on with zoning that it would allow that?
Yeah, so the thing with zoning and like the thing, so not talking about like what we're proposing, the zoning today is usually higher along the major corridors. So like Stoughton Boulevard, kind of like what you just mentioned, does have a higher density than probably like that single family home, which is it's right adjacent to. One of the rationale behind that is just that it's so close to the LIR and like the EJZ and kind of just all these transportation options, that it really does like help people connect to jobs, connect to kind of other opportunities. So that's why generally like the housing there is a little denser.
But you understand what I'm asking? The high rise that's going up there right now, along with other hotels and things, is one block from Sutphin Boulevard, one block west, and it's on a street that has houses. I'm not sure. Of course, families will live in these high rises. Maybe I don't know if it's a hotel that's going up, or if it's um, or if it's an apartment building. I'm not sure. I saw terraces, so I would suspect that that's an apartment building. But how is it that 10-story high rise can go up right across the street from houses, single family homes? I don't understand that.
Yeah, I I mean in general, that zoning was probably crafted kind of like over many, many years, but today that zoning does allow for that to happen within like again like next to kind of that single family home area. But I'm looking at like the zoning in general, and I know like a lot of those houses are have been around for like decades. So like many of those
Yes,
houses are usually from like the early 1900s.
yeah.
Um, mhm.
And
And yeah,
wouldn't that make it even less likely that they would allow a tall building like that across the street from them?
I would have to dig in deeper to like how that ended up happening, but I just know that the zoning today is it's just what you just described.
So is that, so I understand that Sutton Boulevard is an important corridor, especially because of the hub that has developed there. But are they planning more of those further west of Sutton Boulevard?
So one of the corridors that we're looking a little further west from Sefton Boulevard is along Liberty Avenue. That's one of them. And then the second area that we're looking a little further west of Sefton Boulevard is that street right next to the LAR the air train. I'm forgetting like the name of that street right there.
94th Avenue.
Yes.
Mm-hmm. That feeds into Atlantic Avenue further west.
Yeah, those are the
Yeah.
only two going further west of Sefton.
Mm-hmm. Okay. I don't want to see that on my block. I don't want to see high rises across the street from my house. I mean, it changes completely the atmosphere and the whole, the whole environment. These buildings are blocking out the sun, you know. I don't understand how this is possible. I don't understand how it's allowed.
Gotcha. Two things that I think you can do through this process is number one, again, that scoping process is supposed to analyze impacts. So if things like blocking out the sun is like one of your concerns, please write that to us. Share that so that it's publicly recorded, and then we study kind of that impact, like shadows, for example, or impacts um, to other things that you might be concerned about. I think the other thing is that like this is still a process, and everyone still has a right to disagree with the process. So you have more than a right to disagree with the work that's happening, and we want to hear that too.
Okay, I'll be tuning in on you know, the other Zooms that are
Okay,
coming up. Yeah. Okay,
thank
thank you.
you. And thank you for coming out tonight. Lisa.
Oh, I didn't expect to be called so soon because I jumped on late. But I had a couple of questions that sort of piggyback off of some of the two prior speakers. And one is we have the same issue in on my block, which is 90th Avenue off of Rufus King Park. We have several high rises that totally changed the landscape of our neighborhood. And with it came more people, less parking, and more congestion because the streets feed into that one avenue, which is parallel to the park. Not 150th. I'm blanking out on the street, not an avenue, street. And we are all stuck there trying to get to work as these huge buildings are unloading their garbage. We're literally, and it's not just people who drive. It's the people who take public transportation because that's a major bus route too. We're all sitting there waiting for sanitation to unload or clean up piles of garbage from these huge buildings. And so that gets to, some of the issues J-Care has, Jamaica Community Against Rezoning Expansion, because the neighborhood has already been rezoned with these huge high rises, right? It's that, I mean, we can't absorb what we have now. And the plan calls for more like Long Island City high rises, which would totally change the landscape of our neighborhood and make it more congested. So one of the questions um, I had mentioned at the last zoning 101 meeting was how is this, what, and I see you sent something out to people who registered about the environment. But what is the impact on the infrastructure of Jamaica, Queens? I heard that the sewer system couldn't support this expansion. Can you elaborate on that?
Yeah. So I think going back to what I had sent out, that's actually the process that we're about to undertake right now. We're about to study all of that through an analysis that, takes about 6 to 8 months. So I don't have the answer to that question because we have to spend some time studying it. But that also comes with that scoping meeting that I keep talking about, that like if there are areas that you have specific concerns around, please share that with us. Please add a comment to that scoping meeting, that send us an email about it so that we can log it in. And again, like make sure that we're studying these things.
Okay, thank you. I had
Yes.
another question. I don't know if you have time. Um, but
Sure, we can take one more. I think just in general, the end of the meeting is at 8:30. So just want to
oh,
be respectful of everyone's time, but we have
um,
time for one more.
I just was curious about the timeline because you said at the last meeting that we would know we have until next year. And my question is it the beginning of the year or is it at the end of the year, meaning January or December of 2025? Uh, Right, because you're talking about 2025, because that's a big difference.
Yeah.
January is around the corner, literally, in terms of dealing with all these different rezoning issues. So, do you have a timeline for when you expect this rezoning to be finalized and after community input, of course?
So the reason that we gave kind of an estimate for sometime next year is because one, we still have to get through this environmental review. It's a long analysis because it does analyze a lot of different things. And that typically takes about 6 to 8 months. We're also trying to make sure that there's enough time for us to, share this information with everyone, to as many people as possible, and have people weigh in and talk to us about kind of these different issues that are coming up in Jamaica so that again we can work with everyone to think about strategies for the next 15 years. So we are thinking about sometime next year. I think, as this process moves along, we'll get kind of a firmer timeline. I don't have a good answer for you right now because again, we're still kind of starting off this environmental review process, but we should have a firmer timeline. And by that I mean like it's not something we'll share like the week before December and then it's in January. We'll know well ahead of that.
Can I ask just one more question? I wanted I wanted to know, are they planning uh alternate side of the street parking over here? Since I noticed that a lot of people drive to our neighborhood, park their cars, and get on the railroad or the subway.
Hmm.
It's very congested over here already. So are they planning to do that with our neighborhood? We've never had that here before.
That I don't know. That's something for my colleagues at the Department of Transportation, but I can ask them about that and see if I send that information around, if I can get more information on that.
Okay, that would be good because a lot of people are concerned about that. Thank you.
Thank you. All right. We have a couple of minutes left. So before we hit 8:30, I just wanted to quickly say thank you to everyone for joining us for this zoning deep dive. We have another one on the industrial areas next Tuesday night, so same time from 7:30 to 8:30. You can register using the Zoom links on our website. There is another zoning deep dive next Thursday focused around the corridors. And then We have the week of 4th of July, so I hope everyone has a good holiday or a good break. Following after, we have the scoping meeting that week after, which is going to be a Thursday, July 11th. Just to say it out loud again, that scoping meeting is one day. So again, completely understand if people are working, people have can't make it to that one meeting. That's okay. We can actually get comments starting today. It was actually starting last week, but just saying like you can put in a comment today if you wanted to. I sent around that email address, but I'm gonna send it out again after this tomorrow when I send around the recording. That email address, we're using that email address to collect all these comments for scoping. Again, these get recorded as public comments to our scoping document so that we get a better sense of what we should be studying throughout the next 6 to 8 months. And with that, thank you everyone for joining this meeting tonight. I hope you all have a wonderful rest of your night and a wonderful rest of your week. I hope to see many of you next week again. Have a great night. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Good night.
Thank you.